Welcome to Inspiring Working Lives, the Morgan Hunt podcast where we explore public sector leadership journeys. From honest chats about career highs and lows, to lessons and wisdom to inspire the next generation of leaders that will shape our society.
Welcome to the Morgan Hunt Inspiring Working Lives podcast. Today's guest is Shelagh Legrave, CBE. Shelagh is the UK's Further Education Commissioner, appointed in October 2021. She previously spent over a decade as a Chief Executive of Chichester College Group, having first joined as Chief Financial Officer in 2003 and later becoming Principal in 2010. During her tenure, she has led several successful mergers and secured outstanding Ofsted ratings for the group. Before her career in further education, Shelagh qualified and worked in finance, building a strong commercial grounding that shaped her later leadership in the education sector. Earlier in her life, she served for 6 years as an officer in the Women's Royal Army Corps, including a short service commission, where she was notably the only woman in an artillery regiment. She has often credited the Army's ethos of serve to lead as a defining influence on her leadership approach. Her contribution to education has been recognised nationally. She was appointed OBE in 2015 and elevated to CBE in 2021 and serves as Deputy Lieutenant for West Sussex. Shelagh, thank you so much for joining us here at Morgan Hunt today.
It's a pleasure. Absolutely lovely to be with you.
I want to start off, as we normally do, I want to find out about your childhood and just how was your childhood and what was your education experience like?
Well, I had a very happy childhood. My father was a clergyman. He'd actually continued to serve in the army after the Second World War as a chaplain, and then he left in when I was about 4, and we moved into parish life in Leicestershire. We didn't have very much money, but it was a very welcoming, happy home. My education experience wasn't quite as great, so it was a Leicestershire local school. They were trying a different educational model in the 1960s, and I struggled to the extent that I was then sent away to a boarding school at 11, courtesy of my grandfather. He had some money, and I've got an identical twin sister, and we went through education together there. It wasn't a particularly good school. I was told by my headmistress just before my O-levels that I wasn't university material, and I was determined to prove her wrong.
And did you prove her wrong, Shelagh? Yes.
I did. My O-levels were perfectly reasonable. My A-levels were not particularly impressive because I was taught by people in very small classes who'd never done certain subjects. I really should have moved at 16 and gone to a college to do my A-levels, but in those days I wouldn't have known that. But I had plenty of offers for university because it was in the time when very few women went to university. I think it was 25% of the population of women went to university, and there were opportunities. And actually I could have gone to most of the Russell Group universities. I chose to go to Durham and did a general arts degree, but it was so enjoyable. But I had a wonderful childhood, and actually the values that I have held on to throughout my life were embedded as a child, because as a vicarage we had all sorts of people coming in. We ran tea parties, we supported the towns, villages we were in, and it was community service was really embedded at that stage.
Right. Okay, so that passion for education aligned with those values seems to be setting you off on a path from quite an early age.
It did, but I have to admit that when I went to university, I wanted to go into business. My grandfather had worked for Lloyd's of London, and he had a family company, but they made it clear that they wouldn't have a graduate. So it was a choice of go and work for them or go to university, and I chose to go to university. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my degree. I would say education was not on my horizon at that stage, and I decided that I would join the army. So I have my twin sister had gone into the army when she was 18, and I thought this was a great career. I'd have opportunities. I could indulge in my love of sport. I would learn something, and I'd possibly be able to travel. I have to say, I made it to Germany, but that was about
right. Yeah.
The rest of it was in the UK. But it's quite difficult to get into as an army officer, and it was a separate Women's Royal Army Corps and we were separately educated to the people at Sandhurst. It all changed after I left, but it gave me great opportunities. And I think at the heart of it, the motto of Sandhurst is serve to lead, and it's something I very much was ingrained in me from a young age, that leadership was not about ego, it was not about tell, it was about working with people to achieve the very best from them. And that was an absolutely brilliant way of starting a career for anyone.
Because it's all about leadership in the army, isn't it, really? Whether it's personal or leading a group of people.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Although you were taught to do every and all sorts of jobs and roles. I went out when I was in Germany. I went out on a nuclear gun, and it was quite hierarchical. I would say that, which is a slightly. Not the style of leadership that necessarily in later life I've operated, but you learnt an awful lot from some very wise people.
Great grounding. But after 6 years, you decided that the call for business was there. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was not a career for a woman in the army in the 1980s. You were confined to the Women's Royal Army Corps, and then you were posted to different regiments, and the opportunities then to move up. I was a captain when I left, but if I want to go any further, you were capped at brigadier, and there was only one of them, and I felt I'd had an extraordinary experience, but it was not what I wanted to do long term. Whether even at 27, 28 I knew what I wanted to do is quite another matter. So I sent some cold calling letters in those days, because there were no PCs, and I nearly worked for Fox's Glacier Mints, who were based in Leicester. They had an operations role they were interested in recruiting me for, but I sent a letter into the city to an investment bank, and it was at the time of Big Bang, when the stock exchange dealings that were taking place face to face on the stock exchange floor were moving online, and was huge recruitment boom, and I was offered a role as when running a telex and switchboard operation, which I had done in my first post in the army. Right. So it was extraordinary that experience matched. And the person who recruited me had been in the RAF and understood some of the discipline that I brought, and he offered me a job. So I left my last posting, which was in Shrewsbury, and moved down to London and started with about 24 telephone operators and a telex operation that sent millions of pounds a day around the world. And it was my job to ensure it worked effectively and efficiently. And then I started to try and understand financial language and what was happening on a day-to-day basis and what made a difference in terms of when we were like to have peaks. Soon after I was there, 1997, we had the big storm and the big crash. We took 18,000 telephone calls that day, and I had to drive into London in the middle of the storm about 5 o'clock in the morning to see if we could open up and operate. The pressure, particularly on the next Monday morning, to ensure that all the deals went through was enormous. But it was vibrant, it was busy, it was very long hours, but I really enjoyed the pace of life in the city. My colleagues were not very good at looking after the money side, and I always have been quite good at maths. I got a maths A level, and so I started to move into managing the expenditure of the division, which was about 500 million. And
in 1980s,
it was an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
And we started to work with the central financial function within the investment bank. It was part of NatWest, but it was called County Bank and then County NatWest. And I realised that was something that I really enjoyed, and I was given the opportunity to move into that area. And while I was there for 12 years. I trained as an accountant. I did CIMA, Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. They paid for the programme, but I did all the qualifications at the weekend on my own. One of the things I'd say to anyone is a professional qualification is really helpful, but you do have to work hard at it if you're doing it part-time. And I completed the qualification, and my last role was Deputy Chief Financial Officer for money markets and foreign exchange.
So the 80s, during that period of time and working in banking, I mean, it must have been really exciting. The booms, the busts, champagne corks, cigars everywhere.
I've seen lots of things.
Right.
I was a witness in an insider dealing trial. We were bombed while we were there. In fact, we all had hard hats under our desk because it was the time of the IRA. We moved to a much larger office. We merged with various stockbrokers, market makers, an American company during the time we were there. And the extraordinary thing was the relationship with the parent bank, because a lot of banks took on investment teams in that time, but they never, in my view, really ensured they understood the business. And it was quite a risky business and a complicated business. My absolute worst moment was as the senior management accountant, NatWest announced their results, I can't remember which year, and we had then to admit to the head office that we'd mispriced a bond and that the difference was, the figure's going to be wrong, but it was in the millions, and they had to restate their accounts. So that was the very worst thing that happened to me. But it was exciting. I got in at 7 o'clock in the morning. I rarely left before 8 o'clock at night, sometimes later. But I loved the buzz. I really enjoyed working with the people. I had teams of accountants working with me who were much better qualified than me and understood the business much better. But I was able to both manage the relationship upwards, which is something you learn as a middle manager, and also manage the expectations of the people I worked with and ensure that the company benefited from that. I loved it. I wouldn't have left if I hadn't got married.
So this takes us on to the next stage of your career, but you've got these two very sort of significant chunks of experience, one in the army with all its discipline and structure, and then this sort of really exciting new different world of banking and finance.
Banking and finance world in those days was very politically incorrect.
Yes.
So it was quite difficult for a woman to flourish. I think I was only one of 2 women directors by the time I had completed my time there. There was a lot of professional development available to us. So I was sent on a leadership course at Cranleigh. NatWest had its own management centre up in Oxford that I went on courses with, and actually that helped me enormously, because I realised that there is no point in giving people a role where they have got to lead and manage people if they don't have the training on how to do that. And that helped me enormously when I eventually moved into further education. But it had many less rules than the army. That was one of the joys of it. The structures weren't really there. You had access to everybody, and you could just walk into people's offices in a way that in the army you would have to make an appointment, knock, and all the rest of it. So it was a much more open culture, and we sat in an open office as well, which probably in the 80s was unusual.
And it was all pinstripe suits and braces and...
It was, but when they bought an American house, the American house came with a tradition of Dress Down Friday. Now, my boss was an American, but he was a very proper American, and he found that concept really difficult. And I can remember sending an email out because he asked me to describe what a halter neck was, and I had to tell staff that on Dress Down Friday, halter necks were unacceptable, as were shorts. It was, you couldn't make it up really, some of the things that went on there.
Exactly, yeah. Oh, well, wonderful times. But then there's this significant third change which ties in with marriage.
Yes, so I married somebody, we met in London, near where we lived, but he worked actually for the Barbican Centre, but it was more of a 9-to-5 job, and I was doing a 7 a.m. to 8 o'clock job, and the pressure was enormous. And although I was earning very well for those days and had a big bonus scheme, we were at a point where we were giving some, not me, but we were giving some traders £1 million bonuses in the 1990s. This would have been, and I felt that my marriage would never survive if I didn't find a different role. So I again set my CV up. This time, obviously, computers were there, and I sent it out to various people, looked around, and found that the University of Roehampton, or actually it was called Roehampton Institute in those days, were looking for a finance director. And I lived in Fulham, so it was very easy to get to. And I just, put my CV in, and I applied to be the finance director of the FA because I'm very passionate about sport. That didn't get me anywhere. But Roehampton interviewed me, and to my utter astonishment, offered me the role. So I left in 1998, just before the merger with Royal Bank of Scotland, which ultimately was disastrous, but at the time would have caused a lot more change. And instead, I could cycle to Roehampton when I wanted to. It was a very easy commute. I took a big pay cut to go there, but there was a job to do. Their finances, financial structures, financial systems were not in place. It had a very old-fashioned way of operating. It had an interesting legal structure because there were 4 teacher training colleges that came together, and actually the teacher training colleges still owned the land. But I spent 5 years there. I turned their processes around, transformed it to a way that people could understand, delegated budgets, understood contribution levels from various different courses. I was inspired by, she was called the rector, he would now be a vice-chancellor, who was actually a Roman Catholic nun. And she taught me all sorts of things about how to manage competing priorities, but also, again, I had plenty of development while I was there, and sent on courses. We did some work around what does effective recruitment look like, that an interview on its own isn't sufficient, which I would certainly agree with. But it was all based in university research. And I made good friends there. And in fact, I would say the rector mentored me in those days. Really important when you're a youngish leader, to have somebody who can point you in the right direction and help you along the way. I got to know a lot about human resources. Had a very good human resources director. Between us, we worked together to reform some of the practices within the university. And I only decided to look elsewhere because we decided when I was pregnant that we would move out of London. And so I was commuting from West Sussex to London, and that was quite hard with a very young son. And I decided, therefore, to look for something else.
Got it. And the key there is West Sussex next, I guess, because a role comes available.
Absolutely. So I commuted for nearly 2 years to Roehampton, but I found a role locally, and the university friends said, do not get involved in further education. The finances are complicated, the funding system is very different to a university. I'm not sure that you'll enjoy it. But I went for the interview, they offered me the job. It was 20 minutes from home. There were 2 colleges in the group at the time, a land-based college and the main college. And I thought, well, this is my opportunity, I'll go and work there. So I had huge flexibility from the Vice-Chancellor, as she became, from Roehampton, but it was time to make a different move, and so I moved in to run as their Chief Financial Officer originally. Again, it was a transformational, or I had to make transformational changes to the college finances, not particularly because they were in financial difficulty, but because it was all centralised. There was no delegated budgeting. There was a whole host of processes that all happened through one individual, and that was a dangerous way to practice. So my first probably couple of years was trying to sort that out. When I got there, I was introduced as the token woman senior manager. Gosh. So there were 4 people in the senior management team, of which I was the 4th and the only woman. All the middle managers were men, despite the fact that the majority of teachers were women. Yeah. But in 2001, or 2003, there was a huge disparity between male leaders and female teachers. There had been very little work to combat that. And actually, the real fundamental problem was that the managers were not being offered any professional development to learn how to manage. So because you were a very good teacher, you became a manager and somehow were expected to be able to manage. And as we all know, you need to learn the art of difficult conversations, of how to appraise people, of how to coach them, how to make them feel valued, how to organise them, how to set up the timetabling system. All those things, there are different, leadership competencies and management competencies. And one of the great advantages that I had when I arrived there is I had a huge amount of professional development, and I knew what could be possible if we could set out the right programme. So I talked to the principal. He was very on board with that suggestion, and I went out and found a consultancy who delivered a programme that I had undertaken, which was actually run by the London Business School, but was looking at higher level competencies. But the structure of it I thought would work. It included 360 appraisals, some psychometric testing, some assessment centres, which I'd first experienced when I joined the army, which was giving people an idea as to where their strengths were and where their challenges were. And we established some leadership management competencies. We were quite groundbreaking in those days in further education. And we ran these assessment centres for all our managers. And then, having understood where their strengths were and where their areas for development were, we then brought in people to do the technical training, and set up a whole host of other masterclasses to support them as on my leadership journey.
That was pretty cutting edge. How did people respond to this assessment, first of all, and then the development phase?
I think in the first instance they were incredibly nervous.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think assessment centres were the norm, certainly not in further education, but probably not in industry or business either. It was a slightly difficult concept to sell, but I think for most people they saw it as a great opportunity. And we had some fantastic staff. We had some wonderful managers that just needed a bit of advice and guidance. In those days, there wasn't a lot available in the further education sector. There had been some. As we moved into the coalition years, all the funding was dropped anyway. So there wasn't something that you could go and say, well, go on this course and this will help you to develop your leadership. It was something that we needed to develop in-house. But as I became the Chief Operating Officer and I managed human resources and IT and estates and MIS, those sorts of areas in a college during my time before I became the principal. But I had the opportunity to work across so many different sectors within the college as well. I was given a curriculum area to manage. So I was being set up to be considered the principal.
This episode is brought to you by Morgan Hunt, a public sector recruitment agency with over 30 years of experience. Whether you're looking for your next role or growing your team, we match purpose-driven people with organisations making a real difference. Visit morganhunt.com to find out how Morgan Hunt inspires working lives.
So Shelagh, you've had these two experiences, higher education and then into further education. There's a lot of misconceptions about the two. How did you find this change?
Higher education, when I worked at the University of Roehampton, was very structured around an academic senate. So many of the decisions that you might want to make had to go through the Senate, and that required us to work quite hard with the faculty and directors and professors to ensure they understood the need for it and how they would then, and then we'd have lots of academic discussions and eventually we'd get to the place we wanted to get to. Colleges was a much more flexible place. They had far too many meetings, I would say that. It wasn't very effective from that perspective. But there was no real hierarchy. Actually, my predecessor was always known as Doctor, so there was a bit of formality in it, and it took me time to persuade everybody to call me Shelagh, because the last thing I wanted to be called was Mrs. Legrave. It didn't appeal to me at all. But it was a much more fluid arrangement in a college, and it gave you the opportunity to be quite innovative. Whereas in a university, if you wanted to be innovative, you had to take a paper to the Senate, you possibly then had to take it to the board, and it was quite a long process to achieve an end. Colleges were much more flexible. But equally, universities were seen as an extraordinarily successful sector, and colleges were seen as a poor relation. Universities were better funded, colleges were poorly funded. Universities took people who were moving from a level 3, usually A levels, into a university qualification. Colleges were often dealing with people who had become disaffected at school and then were taken in to go to college. And there was a them and us between the two, which has changed over the years, but I still think some universities are quite precious about the way they operate, whereas FE colleges are still probably more flexible in what they can do. There have been lots of entrepreneurs who've led universities, so is that it? That's a broad generalisation, but it's still much more hierarchical than an FE college.
So going back to your role at Chichester, CFO originally, but you seem to be getting pulled more and more into HR, areas of responsibility, developing staff. When did talk of the CEO role and principal role come about?
I've said about 2005, so I'd only been there 3 years. The principal said to me, "You could be my successor." And at that stage, I had a very young son, and I said, "I don't think I could. I don't think, I don't come from an education background. It was rare for an accountant to become the principal. Normally, you came through the teaching route." So he set the seed. I wasn't necessarily very enthusiastic at that particular point. As we got to the stage where he announced he was retiring, and he gave plenty of notice, nearly a year's notice I think he gave, there were then plenty of people who said to me, "Put your hat in the ring and apply to be the principal and CEO." And I talked to my husband about it, and we decided it was the right thing for me to do. In those days, there were plenty of people who wanted to become the principal of a further education college. I think we had 20 plus applicants. There was a short list of 9. All the other individuals were current principals, and it was quite a daunting task. We had death by dinner. When I was interviewed, so the stakeholders came in the first night, and you had to move round tables and talk about why you wanted to become the principal of this college, and then you went through a series of actually assessment centres, so they'd learnt quite a lot, and so you had to sit in a student group, a staff group, a quality group, a finance group, and talk about the challenges of those aspects, and then leadership and governance group. So that you had the dinner the night before, the whole day of that, and then the interview. And I was utterly astonished to get through to the third day. And then I think the shortlist was 3. We all went for an interview. I told the governing body that we could be an outstanding college the next time we were inspected, and at the time we were required improvement, or in fact it was called satisfactory in those days, from Ofsted. And they actually took a risk in appointing me, but they did so, and they felt it was the right thing for the college, and I was given the role in the November, although I didn't take it up until the following summer.
Do you think you got more scrutiny in terms of that application process because you didn't have a teaching background?
Absolutely, and therefore trying to explain how I would improve the quality was always going to be difficult for them to accept I really knew what I was doing. And I'd done a lot of preparation before I was interviewed, so I had a script as to exactly what I knew needed to happen, but I had to convince them. So there was definitely more scrutiny. Also, being an internal candidate is always difficult because everybody knows you. So what you see is what you get in terms of, as the phrase goes. But equally, could I actually make that step up?
Yes.
And I don't think until you do it, you realise what a different role it is. From being a member of the senior management team to taking on the role of chief executive, because suddenly you alone are making the decisions. Yes, you refer them to the board, but the board can't you have a board meeting once a term, and then a series of subcommittees in that time, but it was down to you. And I talked to lots of people subsequently, and I don't think they have realised what a difference it's going to make. And I also think, although I sat on the board of the university, attended the board meetings, and I had sat on subsidiary boards, actually being responsible for a board of governors and ensuring that operates effectively was a new experience for me, and probably the part of the role I found most difficult was understanding what the governors really wanted of me, whilst at the same time ensuring that the college was efficient, effective and operated to meet the needs of the students. It was all, the students are absolutely the heart of any education establishment, and I've always been clear that that's what you need to focus on.
So how did you win the governors around then through these sort of ongoing communications to make sure the needs of the students was aligning with strategy and what was demanded?
They gave me a coach, which at the time I was slightly resistant to, but actually was wonderful. So we were able to talk through problems in a very confidential way. Then it was a matter of getting to know the governors, understanding where they were coming from, understanding what they wanted to hear, a bit of a change in reporting from my predecessor, allowing my other senior managers to talk at the same time. It wasn't just my show. And then working with them as individuals to understand what governance, effective governance really needed to look like, and also to ensure that I went with absolutely the right information. One of the advantages of being a management accountant is I've always been good with numbers. So I've always been able to provide if somebody asks me a number, I will come up approximately with the right figure. So they liked that. But it's also, I had a new senior team with me, so when the principal left, actually 86 years of experience left with him, because the deputy principal decided to retire at the same time, and the director of quality. So it was a very new team that I was bringing on board. One who was new externally, who was my deputy, and then the rest were people who were promoted internally. So it was quite a risky setup at a time that was financially incredibly hard, because we were into the Cameron government. There was no money in the system. The college sector went into biz. They weren't interested in, well, I would say they weren't interested. They didn't have the money to fund us. Schools were the priority for the government, but not further education. It was hard.
Yes.
From that perspective.
So against that backdrop, you've successfully got this job and the dust has settled, and now you've got to go about delivering it, particularly on the Ofsted and what have you. How did you take on that challenge, and what did you have to do with the senior leadership team to get you in the right position?
Well, first of all, we had to set a strategy. And I would say to anyone, make sure you understand your vision. Bring all your staff with you that they are aligned to that vision. Make sure your mission is understandable. So at the time we had a mission to be world class, and everybody said, well, what does that mean? So we did a lot of consultation. We changed it to changing lives through learning, which further education colleges absolutely do. So we spent time on the strategy, and then we spent time continuing to develop the leadership team, the management team, ensuring that we had effective practices embedded within the college. We changed the whole quality cycle. I had a wonderful senior manager who actually now works for me in the Further Education Commission, and she introduced a quality system that people could work with, that was practical, that people understood. There was also a lot on the people side. So it was at a time when teachers were quite scared about lesson observations. We introduced ungraded lesson observations, one of the first colleges to do that. Right. We put all our people through a coaching qualification so they could have that developmental discussion rather than a confrontational, well, I saw this wonderful thing in but this is what you need to develop, and you're not very well graded. Of course we had systems in place for people whose teaching really wasn't very good, but it revolutionised what we did on the quality side, and then we ensured that everything else underpinned it. the college I ran, or colleges I ran, had a very large business in international, which was unusual. We had a lot of students who came to us for a year's study. We had halls of residence, unusual for a general further education college, although we had a land-based college as well, so that often has residential. And so we had quite a number of other income streams, which we developed over time. We had an English exam board that operated overseas. We ran a large nursery business. And all these things, we brought the right people in to lead those income streams, as well as ensuring that first and foremost our duty was to our students, and that they deserved an outstanding experience. It's not about Ofsted, although it was great to get the grades, but it was about ensuring that we were giving them the right career advice and guidance, that we were developing their communication skills and all the other soft skills that you needed. We introduced this passport in those days to measure their soft skills, as well as obviously whatever course they were studying. That they had that opportunity as well.
Gosh, so all this change is being brought into the college to drive up the standard, and I think, yes, of course, it's about the students, but Ofsted kind of acts as quite a nice sort of external appreciation of what you're doing, I guess. Is that fair?
It absolutely does. Yeah. And when we were first judged outstanding in 2014, I will never forget standing outside when we had a cherry picker in the car park taking a picture of all the staff with outstanding across people holding signs showing outstanding. It absolutely does. You have to win the hearts and minds of everybody to what you're trying to do.
Yes.
So you've got to vision it in a way that people understand. You've then got to enable them to be able to do it and manage their workload, and a teacher workload is very heavy. You're never going to be able to pay them a top wage because the funding doesn't allow you to do that. But if you give them flexibilities, if you email them sometimes in the afternoon and say the sun is shining, go off and enjoy your afternoon, Friday afternoon. We spent plenty of time of strategies around people, which brought everybody together and ensured that we were able to deliver an outstanding Ofsted.
So this is all going on at Chichester, and then there's a further calling for you, which is the current role you have now.
That's true, but before I moved into this current role, we then started an area review process, which was run by the then Further Education Commissioner, and the college group expanded. So by the time I left, we had merged with 2 other colleges and opened a third, and bid for 2 more. So it was a very exciting time in further education. So by that stage, I had probably wider influence on further education than just the south of England. I started to chair something called the 157 group, or Collab group it became, which was the large colleges in England, and spread my wings a bit in national policy. 2019 there was a suggestion of a new white paper, and the then civil servant started to talk to me about that. Then we went into COVID, which was required a very different set of leadership skills to get people through COVID. But I was thinking towards the end of my career, I was past 60 at that stage, and thought, well, how am I going to finish this off? Do I stay and manage this enlarged group, or lead this enlarged group, or do I look for something else? I wasn't particularly looking. But the then Further Education Commissioner spoke to me and said, I'm coming to the end of my term, would you be interested? And I thought about it, chatted to my husband with a very different career, different aspect to what I had done. And then I thought, well, I can give back. I want to make a difference to the wider sector. We'd been very successful. We'd had our second Ofsted outstanding. And maybe this is the role for me. So I went through the interview process, which takes a very long time because it's a public appointment. I was eventually interviewed by Gavin Williamson. Wasn't very impressed with the way I'd interviewed. I'm not particularly good at interviewing. Well, I'd lost the skill really, because I'd been interviewed so little since starting as a principal, and was utterly astonished when the chief executive of the ESFA rang me and said, "You got the role." But I was given a challenge when I became the Further Education Commissioner. So prior to that, there'd been a lot of focus on colleges and intervention. There'd been a couple of college scandals, which didn't help the reputation of the sector, which my predecessor had to deal with. As a result of that, there was a report into how colleges were regulated, and some changes were made. And the firm steer I was given by now Sir Gavin was that I should introduce some active support for all colleges, that the Further Education Commissioner was there for everybody, wasn't just for the colleges in difficulty, that we should move colleges out of intervention much more quickly. I think there were about 35 before I arrived, there are currently 10, I think, in intervention, and that we would move from people were worried about the Further Education Commissioner coming in to people really welcomed you.
Yes.
And actually, for somebody who loves working with people, that was a good challenge for me. So we set a new strategy. We also talked to the department about what they wanted us to do, like focus on apprentices, because the apprentice rate achievement rate wasn't very good after the pandemic for pretty good reasons, but needed some help there. So there's some areas of focus that I was asked to look at. But overarching, it was work with colleges to ensure that we share our expertise. I've got a team of 16 or 17 people, all of whom are ex-principals or ex-finance directors, that we help those who are struggling, but we also effectively ensure that effective practice is shared, so that people can be signposted to go to somewhere else if they've got a particular problem, and also to make them feel valued.
And Morgan Hunt, as a supplier into the sector, has seen this sort of professionalisation, if it's solidity, driven through the sector, particularly over the last few years. And you're the latest of a number of professionals who sat in that chair, who are running these sizable businesses and organisations, producing this wonderful sort of line of students coming out to the workplace. It's so important.
It is absolutely important. We still have to remember nearly 40% of young people come out without a full set of GCSEs, without their English and maths. There's a whole raft of different colleges within the sector, some elite sixth forms, but a lot of colleges who are offering that second chance to young people, needing to re-engage them, helping them into their whatever career they want to go to, or giving them some advice and guidance, because they, like me, they had no idea what they wanted to do when they were 16 or 18, providing adult courses. There's some adult-only institutions, but that opportunity for education really matters. We absolutely change lives through learning, and education changes the world, to paraphrase Nelson Mandela. It gives people the opportunity to progress, to go to interesting jobs, to travel the world. We become global citizens now. The opportunities not necessarily just in the United Kingdom. We need to continue to focus on what is great about further education. And I'm not saying university is the wrong choice, because university is the right choice for a lot of people, and lots of students go from college to university. But apprenticeships is also a fantastic route, and has been developed over time. There are ways of coming back and retraining through boot camps. There are short courses you can do, and the colleges are the organisations that deliver that.
And when we look at the recruitment landscape, we see it much more about specific skills, but also a constantly changing, almost faster pace of change within the workforce is going to be required to propel the country forward. So colleges should have this enormously bright future in terms of being the driving force behind that.
The converse side of that is that you don't know what skills your workforce of the future actually needs.
Yes.
But there are always those power skills, somebody described them to me, communication, team building, ability to reason, ability to argue their case, empathy, sympathy, working with others. All those skills are going to be important whatever you do.
Yes.
And then the new jobs that we're developing around green skills, which is going to be increasingly important, the technical skills, using AI to advantage. All of that is a challenge to colleges and will continue to be a challenge, but it's exciting times.
Yeah. So this wonderful experience you've amassed over a number of years, from the army through to banking and finance, into universities, then into FE, then having this sort of overarching commissioner role. If there was somebody in a college now who fancied following a similar sort of pathway, maybe they're not in a teaching side of the college, but they wanted to expand and they felt that leadership was something for them, what advice would you give to them, Shelagh?
First of all, being the principal of a college is the best job I have done in my whole career. So have that ambition to take on that responsibility. Don't be scared about it. I would build a peer network. At whatever level you are, middle manager or senior manager, I would take every opportunity that the principal or other people give to you to work across college, as well as in whatever your specialism is. There is a mentoring program, and you can gain a mentor if you apply for the program, and I would have a mentor who would help you on your career path, and our mentors are ex-principals of colleges, and then I would seek every opportunity to develop through continuing professional development, go on courses, spend time in college, because lots of colleges nowadays are doing their own development cycle, go to conferences. Take the opportunities that are there, because there are lots of them. But also, we all have an imposter syndrome that says, how on earth did we end up where we are? And I would say that all the way through my career, that I've always thought, am I really good enough to do that role? So as individuals, you've got to consider that, of course, but remember that other people are also in that same place.
Yes, I can vouch for that. That's very true. Great advice. So my last question to you is, what's next for you? Where does the road take you next?
Well, I've worked full-time for 45 years, and it's been very full-time, so I'm looking forward to not getting up and sitting at a PC every morning. However, I want to give back. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work at the moment from a sector perspective. I've become a trustee of the Royal Anniversary Trust, which awards what used to be called the Queen's Anniversary Prizes, and now the Queen Elizabeth Prizes for Education. It's something that Chichester won twice. It's the pinnacle of prizes in the further education sector, and we're really well respected, so that's one role. I am very passionate about sport. I've always kept myself fit. I do believe you need to be fit to lead, and I love both watching and participating in sport. So I've just become a trustee of Sussex Cricket Foundation, which is grassroots cricket, and I'm still looking for an opportunity, hopefully particularly in football, which is something I love, to sit on a board there. It will be non-executive roles that I take on rather than anything operational, but I'll also be happy to give back to people if they want to sign me out, or to receive or to hear some advice, or just share a problem. But it will be at my pace. That's what I'm going to spend time doing, more time with my husband, and enjoyment.
Wonderful. Well, what a wonderful history, what wonderful service to this profession, but many others as well, historically. It strikes me that serve to lead, those words you heard back at the very start of your army career, definitely have resonated through, and it sounds like it's going to go on through the future. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for listening to Inspiring Working Lives, the Morgan Hunt podcast, driving positive change and helping you to grow your career. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring conversation. For more insights, opportunities, and updates, head to morganhunt.com.